Welcome to QCA Compliance, to the Compliance Committee's webinar series, and welcome to our members, applicants, and DAC members. I'm Dee Fenton, the Executive Director for QCA's Compliance. Excuse me. Thank you for joining us. Today we have a discussion on environmental stewardship and sustainability, and joining us are Joe Chanin, QCA Compliance Committee committee member, and Logo Mark Vice President of. Joe, can you jump in here? I'm sorry,
No problem.
I missed it.
That's okay. Hi, this is Joe, VP Purchasing and Compliance at Logo Mark.
Thank you. And Matt Hare, Occupational Health and Safety and Environmental Manager at HIT Promotional Products. Welcome to you both.
Thanks, Dee.
Thanks. Okay. As you know, our the Zoom webinar series is, you're welcome to participate. Q&A will be accepted through the Q&A icon, which should be at the bottom of your screen, I believe. And we will be taking questions at the end as well. So with that, I will jump in here. And there. Yes, there you are. There's Joe Chanin and Matt Hare. Thank you so much. We're going to cover where we've been, specifically how the QCA compliance standards related to environmental stewardship have evolved, and then we're going to move on to what has and is continuing to shape our approach, and that would be the external factors, and followed by that we'll do a voices from the ground level discussion involving both Joe and Matt. So thank you. All right, so QCA established the first and only validated compliance standards for the promotional products industry in our publication of the QCA Pillars of Compliance in 2009. The environmental stewardship standard is based in the UN Global Compact standard, which fundamentally requires companies to adhere to the local law where the product is manufactured and transformed, and in the countries where the product will be distributed. The QCA model at its inception was a capacity building model, one whose function was to build knowledge and awareness so member companies could prepare their organizations to take on greater challenges as a result of the preparation they'd been provided through training and other activities. The last point I would like to make about the original environmental stewardship standard is that it was largely aspirational. Members complete a self-assessment, but there isn't a separate validation audit dedicated to environmental stewardship at this time. Okay, so moving on. Following a survey, much like the one that was completed this year, the standard was updated in 2015 to include an expanded set of questions that required quantitative measures, which goes to the capacity building aspect that I mentioned earlier. And with the current survey, the QCA Compliance Committee intends to identify some additional measures to add to the assessment that will continue the transition towards more quantifiable, increasingly quantifiable responses. As you will hear, customers in local jurisdictions as well as company leadership see proactive policies impacting the environmental, decreasing our impact on the environment in the future. So with that, we'll move into the next comment here. Okay. You may not be old enough to remember Silent Spring or the public service announcement with the Native American crying on top of a trash mountain from the 60s and 70s. The 60s and 70s in the U.S. Heightened our awareness related to the importance of care for the environment. After some serious, and I would say catastrophic, events such as Lake Erie igniting, the U.S. government stepped in and began legislating what chemicals could and couldn't be used and the appropriate disposal of those chemicals. Up until today, the EPA regulates such matters. Of course, TSCA is an example of that. The EPA also promoted programs like the Reduce, Reuse, Recycle program, so many of us are now familiar with. Corporate America also strove to make a difference, which is the point of this slide. With the rise of corporate responsibility programs in the 80s and early 90s, we see large companies establishing expectations for themselves and their trading partners. Most of you are familiar with the social accountability programs. Many of those programs include environmental stewardship as a separate measure. Frequently, these programs are referred to as responsible sourcing or sustainability programs. And that leads us to today. According to Governance and Accountability Institute, 85% of the S&P 500 index published, and that would be the S&P 500 companies, published sustainability reports in 2017. 40% of the S&P 500 companies include voluntary sustainability discussions in their annual financial reporting or other regulatory filings. This is a key signal that an increasing number of companies believe sustainability issues are financially material to their success. What they report, however, varies widely and wildly. Among companies that issue sustainability reports, 95% offered quantified actions, annually comparable environmental performance metrics, as well as 2/3 of that 95% two-thirds of that 95% set quantified and time-bound environmental goals. In other words, they're planning to improve their ability to address environmental concerns in their business. Some 86% offer social performance metrics, but only 40% set social accountability goals. So if you think about it, 2/3 versus 67% versus 40%, they're more likely to set environmental goals than they are to set quantifiable social goals. The last point on this page, 30 ESG funds were launched in this past year, growing ESGs, and ESG, by the way, is environmental, social, and governance policies. Growing ESG ETFs, and that's like an indexed mutual fund, to a market of $32 billion, according to a JP Morgan report published in, I think it was May. So, why are we talking about ESG? Many of this year's annual reports reference this term instead of CSR, CSR being corporate social responsibility. ESG is more encompassing and includes more social accountability and environmental stewardship. It includes both social accountability and environmental stewardship, as well as what is being referred to as sustainability. So ESG, what is it? Environmental criteria, well, environmental social governance criteria are a set of standards for companies' operations that socially conscious investors use to screen potential investments. And that is the definition, the textbook definition for it at this point. Environmental criteria may include a company's energy use, waste, pollution, natural resource conservation, and treatment of animals. The criteria can also be used in evaluating any environmental risks a company might face and how the company is managing those risks. For example, are there issues related to its ownership of contaminated land, its disposal of hazardous waste, its management of toxic emissions, or its compliance with government environmental regulations? For social criteria, we look at the company's business relationships. Does it work with suppliers that hold the same values as it claims to hold? Does the company donate a percentage of its profits to the local community or encourage employees to perform volunteer work there? Do the company's working conditions show a high regard for its employees' health and safety? Are other stakeholders' interests taken into account? With regard to governance, investors may want to know what the company uses, or how the company uses accurate and transparent accounting methods, and that stockholders are given an opportunity to vote on important issues. They may also want assurances that companies avoid conflicts of interest in their choice of board members, don't use political contributions to obtain unduly favorable treatment, and of course, don't engage in illegal practices. So I thought a really good example, I guess, depicting ESG is a graphic that was forwarded under the news you may have missed. We've been publishing a weekly news you may have missed for compliance. And this graphic was included in one of those issues. The point I would direct you to is the director motivations. Director motivations are societal impact, long-term viability, and reputational risk. Those are the things that are driving ESG. And when you think about it, your environmental program, your environmental stewardship. This is as distinct from the S&P 500, this is a graphic that was taken from a survey of globally listed companies. So it's not just US and North America, US and Canada, and Mexico companies. It includes Europe, Australia, Asia, etc. So globally, 69% of the boards are to some degree actively addressing sustainability. But what is it? Sustainability, and if you look at this, we're talking about environmental issues as described. We're looking at the social issues, and then we're looking at the economic issues. That intersection of those concentric circles is really what we're talking about, sustainable, and then that yellow center is where we're developing policy to support continued growth in sustainability. Now, that's actually a more the circles are actually, let me go back here real quick, okay. This is derived from a 1987 UN Brundtland Commission. That's the Sustainable Development Goals. the commission was established by the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and I think it is easier and more intuitive in understanding than this next document. You know, if you were to think about it, only you might think that only 12 responsible consumption and production applies, but if you look back at some of these other areas, perhaps life below the water, our impact to life below the water, life on land, there is an overlap in terms of what the promotional products industry is doing and how we're impacting the environment. So, okay. So the next point that I wanted to make was related to sustainability in North America. Forbes interviewed the Center for Sustainability and Excellence related to a recent publication, publication from that organization. And what they found was that the most common guidelines used are the Global Reporting Initiative. And again, we're talking about North America, not Europe, not Australia, not Asia. The most common reporting guidelines used are is the Global Reporting Initiative. There are alternatives which are also used, but as you can see, 65% is the most accepted mechanism for reporting sustainability. The reports are self-reported, which the Center for Sustainability and Excellence sees as a concern, an opportunity which we would expect boards and their shareholders to ask for increasing validation going forward. Okay, so on that note, I'd like to move to the interview questions. And Matt, Joe, are you still here?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good deal. I think one of the most significant issues is that not everyone agrees on what stewardship, sustainability are. And I wonder if each of you wouldn't share with us what your company's perspective, what do you consider to fall within the scope of an environmental policy?
Well, this is Joe. I guess I'll jump in here. You know, we kind of talked a little bit on this, Dee, that this is something we're really kind of putting together. We've had a lot of pieces out there for a while, but we're trying to put together a real complete program in the next year here with some outside help. But at this point, we're looking at everything from on the, straightforward side of how we handle, hazardous waste to recycling, what we use in our products, how they're manufactured, when that impact of both the product and the manufacturing can be on the environment. So we're really kind of looking at a lot of different things pretty broadly because there are so many different things that are affected. And at the end of the day, I'm not exactly sure where we're going to end up with it all, but it's definitely a big, big process of looking at a lot of different things.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The very fact that it touches so many different areas, you have to define it for your organization. And Matt, how would you say HIT is defining it?
Yeah, so when we originally started our program a few years ago, we really just sat down and was like, where is the state of sustainability at and what are they focusing on? So we really just built up off of, about 4 to 5 key pillars, which is air and water pollution, waste management, ecosystem management, and the protection of natural resources. So, and there's just so many things, like you said, that fall into those areas, but essentially those are the key areas that we kind of started with, and we just kind of started plucking away. So from like the air and water pollution side, we started with, figuring out what we are actually putting in our water to begin with, and then, figuring out ways to, reduce or, eliminate whatever hazards they were or could be. So, and it's been a growing process over the past couple of years. So, much like Joe, our system is always changing and updating. So, it goes across the board, but I would say those 4 to 5 pillars is essentially where we started with and are building off of even today.
Well, and I think your point that it's continuing to grow, it's almost the more you know, the more you need to do, or that the more you can do. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and that's pretty much where we've been. There's so many resources in the world today, where, some of the stuff, as your webinar has gone through wasn't here 4 or 5, 6 years ago. So, as other companies come out and, say, hey, this is what we've found in some of these processes or products, we're always adapting and trying to overcome, whatever set, benchmarks or goals are. So, we're definitely ears to the ground, and figuring out what's going on in the industry as well as outside the industry. So, we're always having to monitor compliance standards or, government agencies to make sure that we're meeting the goals as they see fit within the environmental network.
Another question for you guys. When QCA began working with your respective companies, neither of your companies had staff dedicated to monitoring environmental compliance. Has that changed?
I can start. So so HIT, when we started with QCA, didn't have a independent department or person. It was kind of managed by 3 to 4 different personnel throughout the company. So, our facilities team was handling kind of our air emissions, our compliance team, and vice president at the time, he was kind of monitoring the other side of the world. So, over the past, I would say, 3 to 4 years, we've consolidated in one department, which is the department I run today, which is our occupational health, safety, and environmental department. So pretty much what we're doing is monitoring environmental trends as well as our factory output within the key areas that I talked about in the last question. And we're reporting back to QCA as well as other local, federal, and state bodies, because we do hold a couple permits that require us to. So, so we consolidated about 6 years ago when we originally first created the department. But I would say about 4 years ago, the department now has full control over all of the reporting coming in and out of HIT.
Great. Joe, do you have a comment on that? How it's changed?
I would say this. We're not in the same way that HIT is, with it all falling under one department. We do have some additional challenges being located in the People's Republic of California. I mean, the state of California, that, we are dealing with certain environmental constraints and laws and rules and things here that, we have certain people who are directly involved in what we have to report and such. Errol Boucher, who's our VP of all of our production, as well as our HR department. So the 3 of us pretty much work together on these things. We're dealing with a lot of stuff, Prop 65, things like that you have to deal with differently internally if you are located in California than just if you're outside of California, where you might only have to be exposed to labeling of products and making sure your website is in compliance and that type of thing. So it's a little different here, and we meet and work together, but it doesn't fall necessarily completely under one person.
Well, and I'm going to suggest that the experience of S&P 500 would also point that it's really different, even amongst large companies, large global companies. You know, one of the challenges that some of the reporting I've seen indicates is that depending on where you are, you're responding to different regulations, different corporate culture, et cetera. So you may be organized differently to accomplish the same goal.
Absolutely. And, you know, there's certain things that, you know, having things that matter to both our clients and to our personnel, like, you know, we do have a couple of places where people can plug in and charge vehicles. It may not sound like a big deal, but to certain employees and certain people who come here, it is a big deal. So, you know, we are dealing with electric vehicles in California more than a lot of other states. And it's just a little piece of the puzzle, but it's one of those things that, you know, we're looking at more and more because, you know, as an example, I know, you know, myself included, we have at least about 5 people who have either electric or plug-in hybrid vehicles that they're driving to work every day. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of an interesting, you know, part of the puzzle that comes into play that may not in other states.
Mm-hmm. Another question. Corporate approaches to environmental programs span the gamut in the promotional products industry. Some companies do only the minimum to meet applicable regulatory requirements. Other companies are monitoring trends, anticipating changes, and making plans to meet possible new requirements. Maybe holding back a commitment of resources, but they still have a plan. Still, other companies are actively managing their environmental efforts in a way they can statistically report on the impact of those efforts. And I'm actually referencing GRI there. Where would you say your company is on that continuum? So that's the first question.
So I would say from the HIT promotional side is we're always growing and monitoring the best that we can. You know, like I said, our program is ever changing. You know, as much as the world today, the landscape, it could be one thing one day, but be something completely different the next. So, you know, we're always monitoring trends from our new product standpoint, all the way to, you know, do we see as a incline that is more environmentally friendly. So, you know, across the departments, across the company, we're always monitoring the trends and trying to figure out ways to not only, you know, increase environmental awareness, but also decrease, you know, environmental impacts from our manufacturing processes. So I would say we're up there. Are we the best at it? I'd probably say I think everybody has room to grow. But I think, you know, we do or try to do a pretty good job of, you know, monitoring the trends, anticipating the change, and finding new ways to be proactive.
Great. Thank you.
This is Joe. I kind of go along with Matt there. You know, I think we got to be very flexible and open to change, like I said, especially here in California. We have a lot of things in place that, you know, we're putting more in place and coming together on. But, you know, our departments, they all have different, you know, specific things that they have to work on depending on, you know, what they're dealing with, chemicals, things like that. And we're, you know, kind of in the middle at this point. I don't want to, I guess, like Matt said, I don't think we're at the top of the game, but we're definitely anticipating things that are coming down the pike.
So do you think, Joe, that there's a difference between product and decorating operations? So
Absolutely.
Your product planning? So there is?
Yeah, I mean, decorating operations, there's so many things that, you know, you have to, as they say, you really have to look at what's going to end up going down the drain. And that's literally what we're talking about, you know, especially here in California. That's a really important thing on how you deal with waste. The other side of it is when we're, you know, designing new products, you know, what effect, you know, cradle to grave kind of thing. We do try to think about those things. You know, you try to do your best where those things come from, but not always able to. But trying to, you know, have factories that are, you know, doing the right things overseas as well as us doing the right things here. There are two different things, but I believe we're doing our best to do both.
Yep. Matt, would you generally concur there's a difference between product versus your decorating operations?
Yeah, absolutely. You got to think about, the two separate entities, but they both have interlocking compliance standards or environmental impacts. So, definitely like what Joe said, we look at when we're developing these products on, what factories do we want to go to, what products are they going to be made out of, and so on and so forth. Because, being a global force, essentially, where we're shipping around the world, we always have to make sure that we're meeting the Prop 65s as well as meeting, other environmental challenges with, certain products. So, I definitely concur.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I concur 100% with Joe.
Yep.
It's completely, they're two separate but very well intertwined.
Mm-hmm. So are either of you being asked about your environmental or sustainability efforts? And if so, do these requests ask for documentation?
This is Joe. Yeah, I mean, it's starting to happen more where we'll have, questionnaires that come to us, what are we doing? And they'll want to, know, how we're handling certain things. But really I've not seen that many where they're specifically saying, give us, a documentation or something that shows it.
Yeah, this is Matt. So we've had some clients, we're pretty much the beginning of the year, it's really uptick a little bit over last, and they've started to ask for some documents and questionnaires. So we've kind of put together I would hate to say it, but a mission statement, to say the least, of what covers all of our efforts as well as what projects we have going. And we usually send out our environmental policy to clients if they're asking for it. So we definitely try to dive in. The more that we've seen people come up with them, we've done a little bit more, I would say, prep work. So it's a little bit more of a push and send. So as soon as someone asks, we can get it to them right away. So, but they haven't asked for anything too crazy, just more or less a policy statement and some, supporting details, but nothing too crazy.
Yep.
So they're definitely asking more than they have in the past. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Are you being asked to consider different packaging for your products? Have you changed or reduced packaging of products to meet a customer's requests or demands?
Yes and no. Really honestly, we have an internal packaging department that has really focused on the impact of our packaging. From a complete customer standpoint, we've had very little, but our team is always trying to make sure that we're using either recycled materials or boxes that can withstand the transit that we put it through. So, but from a customer standpoint, just very, very little to this point.
Mm-hmm. Joe? This
is Joe. Yeah, it's a balancing act. We do a lot of recycling here as far as with the cardboard that we get in, and we don't always reuse the cardboard for that comes in from overseas for shipping back out. It doesn't necessarily stand up after it's come over on a container and maybe been on a pallet for a while. So we do a lot of recycling internally with the cardboard, but we've also looked at ways to reduce packaging. The challenge can be, you've got to send out a piece of drinkware that's going into a cardboard box, let's say, and if you don't put it in maybe a bubble bag, it won't arrive in good condition. So, you want to balance out that, more or less, how do we package it without over packaging it? But as far as clients asking for packaging, on a few custom orders, I've seen where we've had people ask for, minimalized packaging and that type of thing, but not specifically with, our normal product line.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There were a couple of articles in the news you may have missed, publications. One referenced material. I think you guys know who Sealed Air is. They do the bubble pack. They're now offering plant-made resins for plastics and post-consumer plastics. I found that just fascinating. A couple others that were referenced in those news you may have missed were plastic bottles being replaced by cans. And then, you're never going to believe this, hay, sugar cane, reeds, and bamboo being used for sustainable packaging. And the last one is, gosh, 100% post-consumer fiber packaging. So, and that's Georgia Pacific. They're now producing 100% post-consumer fiber packaging. Incredible. So a lot of choices out there. I just wonder if we won't be seeing some of those pop up in some of the RFPs that QCA members may be seeing. So you heard it here first. Okay. All right. So how are you employing recycling codes in products and packaging?
This is Joe. Mainly with us, I'd say at this point, it's, on any of our plastic bottles, they are coded. So it does give people an option, at end of use to know, where they can take it to recycle. But as far as on packaging and things like that, we really don't have much plastic. It's mainly, cardboard. So at this point, it's pretty much the plastic bottles.
And this is Matt. I piggyback off of Joe. Yeah, we've only really focused in on, a lot of our drinkware and plasticware, a little bit in like our cardboard recycling, but, essentially really just some of the products in our drink lines. That's about it.
Okay. All right. Okay, so wastage from molding operations or defective pieces may be reground into pellets that can be reused in the molding process. This is referred to as regrind. Due to integrity issues, many manufacturers frequently limit the percentage of regrind in a product. Regrind, by the way, can be the culprit when a product is found to contain excessive lead or be contaminated by lead. So would either of you consider allowing certain products to contain a percentage of regrind as part of your sustainability efforts?
Yeah, this is Matt. So to start, so a lot of our, our internal team here is really working with our manufacturers overseas. So we source a lot of our product, and we usually get the ingredients and try to do our best to then send them to labs and other things like that, and really focus on virgin materials. But I would say from our product standpoint, we have very, very little product that's regrind. A lot of it is virgin materials, because of like BPA and lead and all that stuff. So we try to really push our factories overseas to really go with virgin materials, especially because of so many of the compliance standards there is in the U.S. versus overseas.
Are there products that you would consider permitting the use of regrind, Matt?
Trying to think off the top of my head. Yes and no. I could definitely get back on that one in just a moment as we go through it. I would definitely defer to our compliance team because it's a little out of scope for myself.
Okay. Sorry.
Nope, you're fine.
Joe, any thoughts there?
Well, I'd say this, when you're dealing with drinkware and stuff, I think we all know that's where everyone wants to be, anything that's food related, and that's a big no. And at this point, we really push for virgin materials. I mean, you do your best. I mean, obviously you can ask, and it's the old trust but verify. So, we're going to definitely take the time, post-production, whether if we're dealing with, a food-related item, we're going to be third-party testing it. And if we're dealing with a, a general use product, at a minimum, we're going to be, doing XRF gun testing to at least, deal with those, like you were saying, lead getting in there or something like that. That's where we're going to do our best to make sure that doesn't happen on every shipment.
So let's switch topics here from the product and move to the decoration. Have either of your companies made investments in new equipment that resulted in the lowering of the average per unit produced usage of energy, water, or a reduction of VOCs? That was a big question.
I'll jump in on this one. We got a couple of things that we just recently did, and VOCs, I'm going to jump in and talk a little about chemicals. I mean, one of the things we did is we actually changed our, the process we use to make our pad printing plates and switched over to a different process, which basically eliminates the need to use chemicals. And that's a pretty big deal when you're paying for, waste to be gotten rid of and that type of thing. So, and it also increased both the productivity of the people and everything else. So really made a big change there. And also in our doming process, this was a year or so ago, we went to a single resin over a multi-resin, which basically, once again, got rid of harsh chemicals that had to be used to flush equipment. So little things like that actually add up quickly.
Yeah. Great. Matt?
Yeah, so from the HIP standpoint, we are always implementing new machines or new processes or ink lines or anything like that. We're one of the lines that we've added is for more of our apparel line, which is 100% water-based. So that reduced a lot of the VOCs on, when you're getting into under base layers and so on and so forth. So, and that's kind of spread out through like our more of our textile line, and it's really, gaining steam across all of our products. Because the reduction of VOCs usually is a reduction in price, which impacts a lot of different things. Our machines we're always looking at on how they could be increased in speed, but also take up less energy and water. We have a great team internally that does more research and develop, is working with our machine manufacturers on how to take a lot of these avenues and decrease them. So you think about from, an energy standpoint, everyone just thinks electricity, but, there's, the natural gas or the propane standpoint, if it needs a flame or something along those lines. So, they're always looking at advantages to going over one over the other. If it's a flame, is it more responsible to do propane, or is it more responsible to do natural gas? So, a lot of our old propane operations have switched to natural gas because it's naturally piped, it's naturally regulated, so on and so forth. So, so we're always trying to definitely drive the more efficient ways when it definitely comes to our new equipment or review of the equipment that's coming into the factories.
What Matt just said made me think of a couple of other things where, we just recently had one of the laser machines, the chiller went out, and, it's interesting when you go to look at new, replacement pieces that, okay, for a slightly more, a higher amount of money, dollars to buy a new unit, you may be able to buy a unit that's a heck of a lot more efficient. And that's what we actually did, is we actually we actually had a policy on this, and they were going to replace the unit at no cost. But for, not a heck of a lot of add-on funds, we were able to get a unit that was a lot more efficient. And electricity-wise, the ROI is probably, 8 months on the piece. As well as we had another situation where our forklifts and all of our electric equipment in the back, we put in some new stuff in place back there. And at the same time, with the chargers, we replaced old chargers with much more efficient new ones that, electrically basically use about a third of the power. So it's a huge difference.
That's an interesting comment, Joe. From the survey, there was the question, is there a cost associated with reducing waste? Probably I'll remember answering that. A lot of folks said yes, it's part of the business process. But then there were a couple of folks who said it depends. With new equipment, there is fixed investment costs, but generally a cost savings over the life of the equipment, either through process revised in, your example, the elimination of maybe chemicals or other resins or something like that, or the efficiency of the new process. It actually drives the cost of production down over the life of the process. That's interesting that you brought up that point. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about the survey there.
My pleasure.
Okay. Has the company made, have either of your companies made oh, no. Do you monitor water quality? That being the quality of the water that's returned to the sewage system.
So this is Matt. I'll jump in on that one because actually I dealt with it this morning. So yeah. So what it does is we actually it's a multi-step process for us. So we actually have a third-party environmental company that handles all of our hazardous waste. They actually come out, and what they'll do is pull a sample from our filtration tanks in our reclaim rooms prior to the sewage return. And what they do is we've collected samples over, a couple hours. And what that does is, so just in case a spike throughout the day or not, and then they send that out for third-party laboratory testing. And what they've done is we've worked with the lab to take the standards from our local water treatment facilities and ensure that the PEL is acceptable. Not only the PEL, but we're meeting the actual treatment centers, because most treatment centers are equipped to handle different chemicals. So what they've done is we've compiled the list from our local as well as like county water treatment sites, and are testing water against their standards by a third-party laboratory. And they're actually giving us a full detailed report on, if we were high in suspended solvents, or if we had too much grease and chemicals in it that, are over their limit. And then, we work to figure out what those chemicals are and what product is within those chemicals to reduce that in our filtration system, whether it's via like a change in filtration, sock or whether we have to change the filtration system altogether, or it needs to be cleaned, or so on and so forth. So that entire system for us has worked, diligently to stay away from, any type of wastewater permits or anything like that, because the county works with us throughout the year to make sure that they are, we're meeting their needs. So we send it out to them as a best practice. They review it, and they let us know. And we've had the partnership with our local community, both on the treatment side as well as the governing side. And between the team effort, we've been able to reduce the impact from our water, as well as we're monitoring how many gallons we're producing a day, which equates into the year.
That's great. Joe, I know that California isn't voluntary. I think your experience is probably a little bit different than that.
Yeah, we deal with
water district.
Both the county as well as the state here. We also work with an outside third party who has set things up, help us set things up, so that basically we're keeping, like I said, pretty much everything out of the drain that we can. And they come out here, a couple times a year and look at what we're doing and make sure we're doing what we're supposed to. And, luckily for us, we've done well with that and continue to work with that, so that once again, we're not paying for, putting bad stuff into the system and having any issues with that. So like I said, it can be a challenge, but the real key is having a good setup. It sounds like, Matt does it well, where your hazardous waste being dealt with the proper way, and you do your best to minimize it in the first place.
Well, I have two questions for both of you before we conclude. And as a reminder to participants and to attendees, any questions you would like to submit can be submitted through the Q&A menu at the bottom of your screen. What changes impacting your environmental efforts are you anticipating in the next 2 years? And I would include both regulatory and customer demand. And then the last question, what are you most proud of? What effort related to your environmental policy are you most proud of? Matt, do you want to start with?
Yeah, I was going to say I can start. So, I definitely anticipate over the next 2 years, the regulatory side is definitely going to increase. I think, like I said earlier in the webinar, that just the amount of resources that are out there today is just growing knowledge for everybody. And I think as that knowledge grows, there's going to be standards set, for companies, both growing and, established. So I think from the regulatory standpoint, I think you're going to start to see a lot more come out of, environmental protection, especially from like greenhouse gases and other things like that due to like the global warming and so on and so forth. So definitely I think regulatory is going to have the biggest push over the next 2 years, but I can definitely I can definitely see the customer demand at the same time. Most companies today are trying to be the company that has least amount of impact on the world. So I definitely think, over the next coming weeks and months, you're going to see companies, go towards more efficient as well as, safer products. So you're going to see customers trying to reduce, any type of lead or BPA in products, as well as, making sure that what are we doing with our processes? Are we improving our recycle programs and so on and so forth? So I think, customers are going to start dictating some of the market a little bit, and working with companies that are dedicated to the environmental cause. So I definitely think that's going to be the anticipation over 2 years. And I think from our standpoint, HIT's probably biggest, proudest moment is actually going on right now. We have actually partnered with a company called MLMC, which is a recycler. And what that's going to do is remove about 70% of our manufacturing waste this year and divert it away from landfills and into fuel cubes that is used at power plants and cement plants around the country. So over the next 2 to 3 years, it's going to have almost 100% diversion from our waste to landfills and almost make HIT a completely land-free company. So the only thing that'd be going to landfills is, product from our employee break rooms or scrap metals from our manufacturing operations from like the maintenance side of things. So that's probably our biggest accomplishment, I think, in our entire sustainability program. It's definitely been one that has taken about 6 to 8 months to implement, but we're finally up off the ground and we've diverted almost 48 tons already this year from the landfill.
Wow, fascinating. Joe, how about Logomark?
Logomark on this side, I would say similar to, as far as the environmental efforts being impacted over the next couple of years. I kind of agree pretty much straight up with Matt. I think, definitely we're going to see regulations changing. I think there will be a lot of customer demand, though. The new consumers that are, coming up and getting older are looking for sustainability companies. They want to know they're buying from places where people care about more than just making a dollar. And I definitely think we're going to see more and more requests coming through to make sure that we're doing our part. As far as what we're most proud of at Logomark, well, I think as far as it's similar to what Matt was talking about. We really have put a lot in place to keep things out of landfill, and with that, the main things have been for us plastic, paper, and cardboard. And we have a gigantic a bundling machine in back that basically is filled all day long with cardboard, and we have special bins that paper goes in. Everyone has, a separate bin in their office for recycling. I know the bottles also get pulled out. Bottles and cans are dealt with here. But this one giant machine in back basically makes these giant bundles that are about the size of a small car and have to be moved around with forklifts. And I think each one of those weighs like almost a ton. And we store them in the back in the warehouse. And once we get a certain number of them back there, they send a full-size 52-foot long truck, and they are laid out on top of that thing and taken away and recycled. So that for us is really a key, and it's something that we do here that makes a difference, we think.
Well, thank you to both of you for sharing what your respective companies are doing to promote your environmental stewardship standards and sustainability. I very much appreciate you taking the time to join me here on the QCA Compliance Committee sponsored webinar. And if I don't see any additional questions, we've had a great conversation here. So I'm going to say thank you to all of our attendees, that being members, applicants, and DAC members. And thank you to both Joe and Matt. We'll be back next month with our next webinar series. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.